Baruch Hashem, Parashat Miketz. But I want to just talk about Parashat Yosef for a second, and then we'll get to Parashat Miketz. From this Chumash, wonderful Chumash of Kehat. The Sikha is brought down here based upon Sichot and Sefer Mamarim. In Parashat Vayeshev, last week's parasha, we learned that Yosef, in Mitzrayim, he was sold to Beit Potiphar, the royal butcher, and then he was administrating, in charge of the household of Potiphar, and then he was incarcerated, he was jailed because of Eshet Potiphar, who claimed that Yosef had relations, and then he was in prison, and in prison he again became promoted. Like he was promoted by Beit Potiphar, he was also promoted in prison, became the administrator of the prison. Now, when he was imprisoned, he interpreted the dreams of his fellow inmates, as we know. Sarah Mashkim, Sarah Ofim. Okay, Sarah Ofim, as we know, did not survive. Sarah Mashkim, both dreams were interpreted correctly, but the Sarah Mashkim, his dream was interpreted that he would live, and he did live. But before he was released, obviously, Joseph HaTzadik asked him, the Sarah Mashkim, the cupbearer, the royal cupbearer, to mention him, to get him out of prison. He made an effort. Joseph made an effort to get out of prison by having him, asking him to intercede upon his behalf. But the cupbearer, the Sarah Mashkim, ignored his request, and he let him remain in prison. So Yosef in Parashat Vayeshev, we see, could have been quite despondent, quite saddened by the fact that all the efforts he made were for naught. And he remained in prison. And why do we mention this? Because, he was, when he was Beit Potiphar, he was administrator there. He was promoted to be administrator. And now, and then he was demoted, he was thrown into prison. But now in prison, he had two factors. Number one, he was promoted as administrator of the prison. Number two, he was promoted because he interpreted the dreams of two people, of the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ofim. And the royal cupbearer truly lived thereafter. And yet, even though he had these two things, two factors that could have, assisted him, these promotions, yet we see how hopeless everything was in terms of his prowess of his own. He was still merely a slave, a prisoner. So instead of him meeting success, he was in the same situation. He was stuck in prison. What happens? That's Parashat Vayeshev. And then Parashat Miketz, what happens? Yosef gets promoted. This time he's the viceroy of Egypt. But this time he's promoted as the viceroy until, as long as he lives, the viceroy of Egypt, and he's in charge of, not only is he controlling his own life, but even the lives of all the people who live in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. So we see that Yosef's life is like the life of Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our patriarch. Jacob was also had great predicaments, suffering, circumstances, and he had to find a way to remain with emunah and bitachon, faithful and strong, and not to fall into despair, even though he had these predicaments to deal with. We see that Yosef, by by being so successful in such a terrible environment of Egypt, of impurity and so forth, such an ambiance, we see that Yosef was manifesting the qualities that his father, that Jacob, saw in Joseph when he was born. That's why Jacob gave him such special care, because he saw that the special qualities that Joseph had. And with these qualities, Jacob knew that Yosef, would do great things. And it's with these qualities that Joseph was able to continue the work, the avodah that Jacob had begun, the avodah that Yaakov had begun, overcoming the most profound challenge to our divine mission, which is Galut. Because Mitzrayim is Galut. And Joseph, Yosef HaTzadik, in Mitzrayim, in Galut, he was prosperous and successful. And he didn't sink down into the impurities, rather he controlled the Galus, controlled the such a place. So this ability to come to such great levels, great heights in exile, as we see by Yosef, is alluded to by the name of the parasha Miketz. What does Miketz mean? At the end. From the end, at the end. What does end mean? Extreme. It shows that evil. Okay, how evil, which is the ketz, when you talk about extremes. So evil is the low ends. There's two ends, right? If you talk about the dvarim kitzonim, that two opposite extremes. So the evil is the low end. But what did it do by Yosef? It elicited, and that's what it should do by us as well. It should elicit with an E, E-L-I-C-I-T. It should arouse and elicit, further than arouse, our inner strengths, our kochot pnimim, for good, to do good. The upper extreme. So, as much as the two extremes of any process are the beginning and the end, right? Two kitzoniut, you have the left extreme or the right extreme. You have, right? So, and so the left extreme will bring a person to the right extreme. The word Miketz also, not just is it an allusion to the end of exile, whether it's Yosef's exile, Galut in prison, and an end to that's Miketz, that Yosef was freed from prison. But it's also in our generation, of the present and general exile, the Geula Mitit Vashlema. Now, what do we see? How did Miketz happen when Yosef HaTzadik realized that with all his efforts, nothing came out of it, and asking people to intercede, the Sarah Ofim, Sarah Mashkim, to intercede upon his behalf, that all the efforts didn't bring anything, and rather it was only due to his surrendering his ego, his self-abnegation, self-effacement, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu granted him the success that he needed. As soon as he acknowledged God's presence and providence, hashgacha pratit, in his life, that Hashem is doing everything, and he let go of this illusion, this mistaken thoughts that his achievements were the result of his own prowess, that due to his abilities, etc. That's when he was successful perpetually, and he remained viceroy, because he surrendered his ego. These are the lessons of Parashat Miketz. Every descent, every yerida we undergo, is supposed to lead us to an aliyah. The way we transform a yerida